Welcome to Global Money Talk, brought to you by SamproTV. Greetings to all of our viewers from across the United States, Korea, and around the world. We're coming to you live from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange in New York City, the financial capital of America. I'm Remy Blair, and today I'm joined by Tai Wong, independent proprietary trader. Good morning and happy Monday to you, Tai.
Happy Monday. Hope you had a good weekend.
I did, thank you. How's your weekend?
It was very, very nice. I mean, lovely weather. I hear we're going to get rain sometime this week, but maybe even a storm for Thanksgiving, which would be kind of terrible after all the great weather we've had. But I mean, it's a lovely late fall day. Late fall days, can't complain at all. But glad to be back here. Yeah. And today it's Megyn Kelly's birthday, and I'm hoping that one day they'll mention us in the same breath as Megyn Kelly. Highly unlikely for me, but perhaps for you. It's also what's believed to be Mickey Mouse's birthday, the first time he showed up in an animation or something, so that's important. And finally, on a slightly more serious note, certainly more serious note, it's Latvian Independence Day, and Latvia is one of those Baltic states. They border Russia. They got their independence in 1918, got it for 20 years, and then had to wait, sort of another 50 years before they could enjoy it again. So happy Independence Day to Latvia.
Well, as we kick off a new trading week, it's hard to believe that this is the final full trading week of November, because next week here in the U.S. is Thanksgiving, and apparently there are less than 45 days until year end, believe it or not. So here we are, the final full trading week of November, and we're seeing the major stock averages try to eke out a gain after last week's negative close for the Dow, Nasdaq, and S&P 500.
So, I have a little bone to pick with Fed Chair Powell. I think the last time we were on, we were saying, the data, you're saying data doesn't really, moving the markets very much. I'm like, yeah, because, basically, the December, rate cut is just baked in. We'll do that, worry about next year, and, that's not really going to be, not really going to be an issue. And so, literally, I think Powell heard us and said, no, I don't know about that. So in the afternoon, he comes out, and let me read it directly, because it was really quite interesting. He goes, the economy is not sending any signals that we need to be in a hurry to lower rates. The strength we are currently seeing in the economy gives us the ability to approach our decisions carefully. Boom.
Yeah, so we were talking about this, Tai, how Powell perhaps was listening in on what you were saying last week on the show.
So the stock markets took it quite poorly. Gold took it poorly. Bonds took it poorly, because if they're really thinking about not cutting in December, and really next year is at this point, pretty uncertain. That really, the market's not happy about that. The market really wanted this cut, felt like the rate cuts were, are still coming, just uncertain when. And this, to tell you I was just checking the Fed funds odds for the rate cut. Before, on Friday when we were chatting, 83% thought there would be a cut. Basically, not a problem, right? Now, it's 60-40. So it's basically a coin flip, and all of a sudden, that data is going to be important. The PCE, the employment report, are probably the two things that are really going to matter. And this time I will really be looking for Nick Timiraos for an article, because it's, I think, at 50-50. I'm not sure if the Fed really wants it to be at 50-50. Maybe they're afraid something will upset the markets. But all of a sudden the data, matters again for the next few weeks.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, economic data coming down the pike. So today is November 18th, and the December meeting for the Fed Reserve will conclude on the 18th with their rate decision. Right. So we have about a month to go. And as you mentioned, we'll get that employment report for the latest month. And unlike the previous month, we might get more certainty. We have to keep in mind that we saw a low non-farm payrolls number for the latest report, just given the hurricane effects, as well as that seemingly never-ending Boeing strike, which did come to an end. So
yeah, it did. And so this week's actually weekly initial claims on Thursday will be important, because it's for last week, which includes the 12th, which is the survey week for non-farm payroll. So that number has been very volatile recently, and it's been relatively low, so that number will be important. The other thing I should add is, after Powell spoke, Austin Goolsbee came out. He's the Federal Reserve President for the Chicago Reserve Bank, and he came out, and he's really probably the most dovish and outspoken of the doves on the that's part of the FOMC, and he said, well, we'll have to be careful, but I expect rates next year to be much lower than where they are now. So Goolsbee has been known to be a dove, so the market will probably take that with a grain of salt. It's not quite as if he said something hawkish or if Powell was speaking. And what is really interesting is he's probably the perfect replacement for Jay Powell if Trump really wants lower interest rates. Because Trump's a developer, he thinks lower interest rates are great and will help the stock market go up because that's how he measures himself. He loves low interest rates because he's a developer, and he loves a higher stock market because that's how I'm rated as a president. I'm not sure that's the only thing you want to be rated as, but be that as it may. He probably is the perfect guy, but he was sort of significantly attached to the Obama administration, so that's not happening. Interestingly, I think Trump is going to end up choosing somebody who might not be that friendly on interest rates, but sort of more friendly politically. Sort of a little ironic.
Yeah, and speaking of politics, all eyes are on what will happen in the upcoming year as Trump takes office, but he was in town, wasn't he, over the weekend, and there were several fights that people were paying attention to here in the U.S.
So he was, and this in some ways makes him, somebody said he's one of one. There is only one Trump. In some ways, like there was only one Obama who could do what Obama did. Maybe Trump could do it on the other side of the aisle. So there was a big fight, UFC 309, the Ultimate Fighting Championship. So for the back half of it, Donald Trump shows up. I mean, the man is the president-elect. I mean, he's been making a lot of appointments, really busy. He shows up with an entourage, both his sons. Bobby Kennedy Jr., Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, who's like a foot shorter than everybody else, just because he was next to so many tall guys. Elon Musk was there. DNI Tulsi Gabbard was there. It was remarkable, and I didn't hear. I was watching it on TV, but according to broadcaster Joe Rogan, they said the noise in Madison Square Garden was absolutely deafening. And it makes sense. Sort of the people would probably go to UFC or probably by and large Trump supporters. It's not like a cross section of New York City, but he sits there for 3 hours. And a couple of the last two fights, the fighters will come out and talk to him. The winner of the heavyweight championship, considered one of the best fighters ever in the UFC, comes out, shakes his hand, gives Trump his belt. Trump gave it back, but gives Trump his belt. And it's really interesting how, as polarizing as he is to the people that believe in him, you just can't see a politician of that stature go and sit for 3 hours or whatever, or 2 or 3 hours at a UFC fight. You're just not going to see it. You won't see it. You haven't seen it before. You won't see it again.
And absolutely, right? It really makes you think about the optics of something like this, especially with him bringing this entourage to the middle of Manhattan on a weekend. So quite some interesting headlines we saw here in the U.S. and some of the tabloids as well with some of the photos.
And I'm sure the Secret Service was none too, he is who he is. You're just going to have to, to do all that. But they did a good job sort of staying out of sight. But I would think security was probably pretty high.
Oh, absolutely.
At the Garden. But more slightly. I mean, and it's interesting to see the devotion that in some quarters that Trump really brings out. But also, we're looking at he's filling out more people in his cabinet. So I think we talked about Pete Hegseth last time, right?
We did.
So there were some. He's Treasury, slated to be the Treasury. He's the Treasury Secretary nominee. Sorry. I apologize. The Defense Secretary nominee. And over the weekend, there was a little scandal that came out that apparently a woman had accused him of assault in 2020. It was investigated and charges were never filed. But he apparently came to a monetary agreement, paid her a sum of money, and she agreed to stay quiet. And one of her friends apparently came out with this. So I'm sure that was not what Chief of Staff Susie Wiles wanted. But looks like he is it looks like one of the, I don't know what it is, but it seems like an indiscretion on both sides, and both sides wanted to keep it sort of quiet. He's married. I think she was married, both with children, and it's not a good look for anybody. And I think Hegseth is probably still pretty secure because Trump, of all people, and he's not Mike Pence, right? Trump's not, you can say a lot about things about him, but he's not a Boy Scout. He sort of would probably not be the guy who'll pull Hegseth's nomination, because he had sort of a dalliance. And interestingly, I went to, because the betting markets were so good in the election, I went to the betting markets to see if there were markets on. Of course, there were. Yeah. So Hegseth is, between 75 and 80% likely still to be on the betting markets to be the Department of Defense nominee. Interesting. More interesting is Matt Gaetz. Matt Gaetz is around 30%. So I think odds are that he is probably not going to be the nominee for Attorney General. I just think the Republicans, the senators in the Republican senators won't allow that. But there are a couple of other interesting things. So Secretary of the Treasury, apparently there's been a huge fight between two camps. One wants Scott Dissent, who I personally favor, not that that really matters to the president. I just think he's going to be, if there is a financial crisis, of everybody there, Dissent's the guy I want in the seat. He's invested in it, he knows it better than anybody else on that list. That list is great, but nevertheless. But Elon Musk came out supporting Cantor Fitzgerald and Howard Lutnick. And apparently other people are being considered because Trump is a little annoyed that his two camps are fighting so aggressively over this, that he's interviewing other people, including private equity firm Apollo's Mark Rowan, and Bill Hagerty of Tennessee is back in the mix, and so is Kevin Warsh, who was in the mix for Fed chair last time before he did Powell. So I don't think he has a bad choice in any of those. I think Dissent is still probably the best. Although Lutnick might stir the pot a little bit. So I expect we will see that probably sometime this week. And then finally, for the Energy Secretary, very controversial, Chris Wright. He's head of Liberty Energy. He's a big fracker. Apparently he's the guy who famously drank fracking fluid live on TV to say this is actually pretty safe. I looked him up over the weekend. He's a climate skeptic for sure, an MIT-trained chemical and electrical engineer. And I'm not one of those who believes that where you went to school determines how good you are, but I would make an exception for that, with MIT and Caltech, because I think more than almost any other school, those schools are probably the A team. So he's going to be, I think he's going to really pump for natural gas, for being able to export liquefied natural gas. I think he'll be actually very friendly towards things like nuclear, which is great. I think he doesn't care very much for wind or solar. He says they're 3% of our energy needs. They're just not reliable. Pretty controversial, but I think at this stage also likely to get through.
Yeah, we all know that when we're looking at headlines in terms of breaking news, a lot of these names keep on popping up, especially given some of the controversial picks. And I think only time will tell what will eventually end up happening. But for the meantime, I suppose we'll be popping our popcorn while we watch to see what unfolds. And I think right now would be a good time to do a quick market check, since we are seeing the major equity averages turn positive, with the NASDAQ up by nearly 1% on the session. So right now we are seeing the Dow up over 50 points on the session, and Apple as well as Verizon Communications leading the way higher this morning. Meanwhile, the NASDAQ is extending gains into the midday hour, as we're seeing the NASDAQ up by nearly 200 points or 1% on the session, while the S&P 500 up 0.6% and higher by nearly 40 points on the session. So while we're doing our market check this morning, I know both you and I mentioned gold, and we're seeing a recovery in gold, and it is trading above the 2,600 level. So what's going on this morning with the precious metal? So
I think gold and the rest of the precious metals complex, silver, platinum, palladium, has had a pretty rough run of it over the past week or two. And it really looked to me on Friday that just given the price action, that the downturn has run its course. And I think that as well as in part due to what Powell said, I think the stock market is trying to come back for it. But the precious metals have turned up, really nicely higher. And I actually prepared a few charts. So let's take a look at those, and let me see if I can get the right ones up in time. Let's look at graphic 2, if we can. And this is a gold chart, a daily chart, and you can see it's been down most of November. It went to the high October 31st, I believe, and it's been down for about 2.5 weeks. And you can see that green bar. This chart was taken very early this morning, turn up, and it's extended its gain so far. I think it's up 2%, back above 2,600 on spot. I think it has more to run. I think if you're a gold bull, this is probably a good time to add. If you took some profit earlier, I think it's a good time to buy some back. I could see this as a trade back up to 2,700, sort of relatively easily, and then we may have to think about it. I do think that for the miners who have not hedged, seeing a $200 drop in the price towards the end of the year, they may be moved or compelled to hedge a little bit. But I think I think it should be a good week for gold, maybe even a good couple of weeks for gold. Right now, you could trade it, buy it around here, and look to take profit, maybe 5 to 7% higher. Or if you're a buy and hold person, this is also a good place to do that. Let's look at palladium, which is graphic 3. We looked at that last week, and that was just an absolute pounding by speculators and hedge funds after it reached a high. It's up 5% today, so I'm actually slightly annoyed I didn't actually buy the bottom, but I think this has room up to perhaps 1,100. So there's probably another. Where are we right now in palladium? Let's take a look. Palladium's just over 1,000. I think we could see 1,100. So there's probably 9 or 10% in it. I think this is worth, off the lows, worth thinking about buying here for a trade. I do think the outlook on this is better with Trump in office, but that might take a little time. But there's definitely a trade here. And there was one other chart I wanted to show. Let me look at that. It is the China chart. Just very quickly, graphic 4, if you don't mind. So this is the China benchmark, CSI 300. You saw that big spike, obviously, was the monetary and fiscal stimulus. It got back higher, but never made the highs. Now it's there's just a little bit of disappointment. I don't know how much it will rally. I don't also expect it to drop significantly because a lot of the speculators are long. And, do you really want to drive anything against your position? And also the way that the close attention that the Chinese government is paying to the markets, do you want to be the person caught, manipulating the markets in China? Here, if you get caught for fraud, you might pay a fine and go to jail for a little bit. But in China, if you're caught for manipulating the markets right now, I think the penalties could be quite a bit more severe. So I'd expect it would hold up sort of reasonably well, but we're going to need some more news for this to have a substantial rally.
Yeah, so Tai, while we're continuing our trek around the world, looking at markets overseas, I think this is a good time to talk about geopolitics.
Yes.
So I think you and we were paying attention to what was happening overseas, especially when it comes to the Middle East, but of course Ukraine and Russia as well. So as we head into year-end and we await a new administration in D.C., what did you make of some of the recent developments when it comes to geopolitics?
So Russia launched a huge strike on Ukrainian infrastructure over the weekend. Did a lot of, I think it might have been actually part of Friday as well, but did a lot of damage. And this could be especially painful because the winter is coming on, and it gets pretty cold in some of those parts. And also they've added as much, and now they're talking about as many as maybe 100,000 North Korean sort of, I suppose, mercenary soldiers to to fight in the war, because the Russian troops have been drawn down quite sharply over the past several years of the conflict. And in response, the President of the United States, Biden, has told the Ukrainians that they can use the Army tactical missile system not simply to hit along the border, but to strike deeper into Russia. So you'd expect that now, with Trump due to come into office January 20th, in 2 months, both sides are, and he seems to want to have a peace settlement with the threat that Ukraine, you better go get a deal, because you're probably not going to get the support that Biden's been giving you. Both sides are trying to jockey for the best position to start negotiations. So you could certainly see that this, the use of these missiles, if it hits anything significant in Russia, could really stir the pot in that area of the world. And this is not priced in. I mean, you could argue that maybe the gold rally today, I think it was more of a technical reaction, is partly, partly related to that. Certainly, the dollar's been very strong. Would get stronger. I think the yen would probably get stronger, as it does if there's typically any international crises. But it doesn't feel like it could. It's priced in, and that part of the world could get hot really, really quickly if some substantial damage is done. So something that I think we need to keep an eye on over the next few weeks.
Absolutely, because when we think about geopolitics, it doesn't take much to cause a reaction, especially if it's unexpected. And continuing our trek around the globe, so Biden was down in South America visiting the Amazon, so with COP29 and a lot of focus on what's happening in terms of the climate. And we've seen so many extreme weather conditions around the globe. Even here in New York City, focus has been on the weather, especially since we are in a drought here. So we know we only have one planet, one home to call our own. But in terms of the climate here, what are you focused on, Tai?
So, and I should actually bring us back to Chris Wright of Liberty Energy. They published a 180-page report with a lot of data and a lot of charts. I actually looked through part of that report. I'm a geek. I just wanted to see what he had to say. And not being an expert in climate, he had a lot of data that said actually, lives lost to bad weather, has dropped continuously over time and continues to drop. But if it bleeds, according to I think. His view is if it bleeds, it leads. You get all the coverage of the really bad storms, but overall, his data purports to show that it's those storms haven't gotten more frequent and fewer lives have been lost. But again, he is a climate skeptic. He has a lot of data in there in terms of saying that the sea level's been rising 20% of an inch, or 0.2 of an inch every year for the past however many years, will continue to do so. This is not a new trend. And he also says temperatures are rising, but they're rising steadily. It may not be due to exactly what we're doing, and if it is, the damage is not as bad as it purports to be. But nevertheless, that's why he's so controversial. One of the things that came out of the COP29 was a lot of people have said, 1.5 degrees Celsius, and that's been trotted out as the number that we have to fight, is Bloomberg reports it's dead. I mean, we're basically there. We will go through it in the next few years. Why are we still talking about it? And the view was, we spent so much time for the opposites of the climate. The climate. People really concerned about it said, listen, we have spent so much time getting this in the market, in the heads of the people, 1.5 degrees Celsius. If we backtrack off that now, then we're just going to lose all credibility. So essentially, it looks like they will try to stick with that target, even though it's basically an indefensible position. Generally speaking, I don't like indefensible positions because, well, they're hard to defend, and they say, what's 1.8, and we haven't seen any disasters yet. What happened to your 1.5? So that's the risk. And it's Biden's last sort of climate. COP29 will be his last.
Yeah. Well, we will keep our eyes on that, and I'm sure we'll be talking about this. So before we wrap it up for today, speaking of homes and housing, we get housing figures out this week. We'll be paying attention to that in addition to some consumer data as well as flash PMI readings. But of course, we're all awaiting earnings, and especially earnings from NVIDIA. We get big box retailers as well, but NVIDIA being the focus. Are you going to any NVIDIA watch parties?
I don't know about I don't know watch party, but I will probably be watching it on Bloomberg TV because it's the easiest actually to see. It's a little harder to get CNBC on, and we're not covering it live. So,
that is true.
Perhaps someday we will. But well, before we get there, certainly I think the housing data is just going to be blah for the rest of the year. Mortgage rates will probably stay static at pretty 6.8%. I don't think a lot of people are buying houses there. It's going to be quiet, I think, until sometime. Probably in the early spring of next year is my guess, when rates seem likely to at least come down a little bit more. Or be less elevated. But NVIDIA, I mean, you could argue that the NVIDIA about a year ago, when they really had those blowout earnings, woke everybody to, oh my God, AI, and billions and tens and scores of billions of dollars are being poured into AI. Whether it's going to be effective or it's going to be worth the investment remains to be seen. But NVIDIA is really the barometer, and in some ways now the barometer of the market. Last time in August, they beat earnings 68 cents, and they had revenue of $30 billion in that quarter. So this time the market is looking for 74 cents in earnings and $33 billion in revenue, and it's still they had better beat, because they're trading at the top of near all-time highs. If they don't beat, or if they slip somewhere, and unless there's a really good reason for it, as in one of their factories had issues or whatever it is, and we haven't heard that. If they don't at least beat by a bit, I'd expect the NVIDIA stock to draw down a bit, and that could hurt the mood, that AI-driven sort of growth mode that the market is on. So it'll be probably the most important earnings number of the earnings season. I mean, they come out a little bit late, but there's a big barometer.
Well, the good thing is, Tai, you and I, we will be covering this later on this week, since we'll be together on Thursday, and we'll be able to bring our viewers the latest earnings from NVIDIA. We also do get some big box retailers, TJX, as well as Walmart, and ahead of the holiday shopping season, we'll be paying attention to what they say in terms of their outlook.
Right, absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, and Tai, before we wrap it up, as you mentioned, Goolsbee, he'll be speaking again tomorrow, so we'll pay attention to what he has to say. But ahead of the December Fed Reserve meeting, we do have several Fed speakers that we will be paying attention to, and of course, the Wall Street Journal, anything out from Tim Moraes, I'm sure you and I will be talking about that as well. Yeah, I think
as we go into sort of the first part of December, the second week of December, you'll get a better sense of where the market is leaning. I think the Fed is they're allergic to uncertainty. They don't want a lot of uncertainty. So I think they will try to tweak it one way or the other. And it's interesting that Powell's he's been doing this for a long time. I remember his first press conference, and he said a couple of things that, and the market went. So he's learned really well. So this is clearly intentional. He wants to put some uncertainty in the market. And does that mean that December is really in play? It's honestly, it seems hard to believe, but for the moment, I think he doesn't want the market to get too comfortable.
Yeah, and just looking at the calendar in terms of Fed speakers, we get Goolsbee tomorrow, we get on Wednesday Lisa Cooks, Michelle Bowman, as well as Susan Collins speaking again. So that is something to pay attention to. And later this week, we get Michael Barr speaking, as well as Michelle Bowman speaking again. So a lot of Fed speeches to look forward to.
So Michelle Bowman, if we recall, was the dissenter in September against the 50 basis points move, and she seems to be the resident hawk on the and she's just a regional president. She's not a governor, so she's done after this year, and they'll rotate. I think Goolsbee might be a voter next year, but I'd have to check that. So it'll be interesting to see, what stance she gets. I mean, if she comes out and, and is pretty hawkish, and I don't know if we're ready for yet another cut, then you could say there's one dissent, and maybe I don't think Powell wants more than one dissent. So maybe he's getting a feeling from these folks, and that's why he's put it out there to balance the scales a little. It was a very interesting speech, a short speech, and he left a good one to to the second to last paragraph.
Absolutely, Tai. Well, I look forward to having you join me on Thursday, and we'll be covering all that and more. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that will do it for Global Money Talk Live from the New York Stock Exchange. We're so excited to bring you daily coverage here on Sampro TV. You can check out the show anytime on our YouTube channel by searching Global Money Talk. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be back tomorrow. Have a great day.